Welcome to today's inspiring story. I'm excited to share with you The Boy Who Never Gave Up, a powerful tale about persistence, dreams, and the incredible things that happen when we refuse to quit. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a 12-year-old boy who dared to dream big in a small mountain town. When everyone told him his goal was impossible, when obstacles seemed insurmountable, and when even his closest supporters began to doubt, Marcus kept going. In the small mountain town of Cedar Ridge, where morning mist clung to pine trees and the air always carried the scent of fresh snow, lived a boy named Marcus Chen. At 12 years old, Marcus had already learned that life wasn't always fair, but he possessed something that couldn't be taught or bought, an unshakable belief that every problem had a solution if you just refused to quit looking for it. Marcus lived with his grandmother, Nai, in a modest house at the edge of town. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 7, leaving him with only memories of bedtime stories and the faint smell of his mother's jasmine perfume that still lingered in her old sweater. Nai had taken him in without hesitation, wrapping him in love and wisdom that she'd collected over her 78 years. The house was small but filled with warmth. Nai's quilts covered every chair, and the walls displayed Marcus's school certificates and drawings alongside faded photographs of family members who had come before. The kitchen always smelled of ginger and star anise, and no matter how little money they had, Nai somehow always managed to put a hot meal on the table. But Marcus had a dream that seemed impossible for a boy from their circumstances. Every morning, he would wake up and look out his bedroom window at the mountain peak that towered over their town, Mount Resilience, named by the first settlers who had refused to be defeated by its harsh conditions. At the very top of that mountain sat the Chen Observatory, built by his great-great-grandfather, who had been a renowned astronomer. The observatory had been abandoned for decades. The winding mountain road that led to it had crumbled away, and most people in town had forgotten it even existed. But Marcus knew every story about it. Nai had told him how his ancestor had spent years building it stone by stone, carrying equipment up the treacherous mountain path, determined to create a place where people could study the stars. He believed, Nai would say, her eyes twinkling as she stirred her tea, that if you could see far enough into the universe, you could see far enough into yourself to find the courage for anything. Marcus wanted to restore the observatory. He wanted to fix the old telescope, clear the debris, and make it a place where kids from town could come to learn about astronomy. But everyone told him it was impossible. The mountain was too dangerous. The path was too broken. He was too young. The project was too expensive. Dreams are free, his teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, had said kindly when Marcus presented his idea to the class. But making them reality costs more than most of us can afford. But Marcus had learned something important from watching Nai. Every morning, she would tend to her small garden behind their house, coaxing vegetables to grow in the rocky mountain soil. When neighbors asked how she did it, she would smile and say, "You don't plant a seed expecting it to grow overnight. You plant it, water it, protect it, and trust that if you never stop trying, something beautiful will happen." That autumn, Marcus decided to start. Marcus began by researching everything he could about the observatory. He spent hours at the Cedar Ridge Public Library, a small building that smelled of old books and coffee, where Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, let him stay after closing time if he was deep in his studies. He discovered blueprints in the Historical Society's archives, old newspaper articles about his great-great-grandfather's work, and even some letters describing the original construction. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that restoration was possible. But first, he needed to see the observatory for himself. The trail up Mount Resilience had once been a proper road, but decades of weather had reduced it to scattered rocks and overgrown brush. On a crisp Saturday morning in October, Marcus packed a backpack with water, granola bars, and a flashlight and began the climb. The first mile wasn't too difficult, but as the path grew steeper and more treacherous, Marcus understood why everyone said it was impossible. Fallen trees blocked the way. Rocks had tumbled down from above, creating barriers that seemed insurmountable. His legs ached, his lungs burned in the thin mountain air, and twice he slipped and scraped his hands on sharp stones. After 3 hours of climbing, just as he was beginning to think the adults might be right, Marcus rounded a bend and saw it, the Chen Observatory. It was more beautiful than he had imagined, even in its current state. Built from the same gray stone as the mountain itself, it seemed to grow naturally from the peak. The dome was cracked and covered with moss, and the wooden door hung askew on rusted hinges, but the basic structure was solid. Marcus pushed through the door and gasped. Inside, covered by years of dust and debris, was the telescope his great-great-grandfather had built. It was massive, made of brass and steel, with gears and lenses that caught the afternoon light filtering through the broken dome. Despite the neglect, Marcus could see the craftsmanship, the love that had gone into every detail. He spent 2 hours cleaning a small section of the lens with his shirt, and when he looked through it, even without proper alignment, he could see the valley spread out below him like a map. For the first time, the dream felt real. On the way down, Marcus made notes about everything that needed to be done. The path required clearing and repair. The observatory needed new roofing, electrical work, and careful restoration of the telescope. The project would require materials, tools, and expertise that he didn't have. But as Nai always said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Marcus's first stop was the town hardware store, owned by Tom Sullivan, a gruff man with calloused hands and a heart bigger than he liked to admit. Marcus explained his project, showing Tom sketches he'd made and photos he'd taken with a disposable camera. Tom listened patiently, then shook his head. "Son, I admire your spirit, but that's a man-sized job you're talking about. Takes more than determination to move mountains." "I'm not trying to move the mountain," Marcus replied. "I'm trying to make it useful." Something in the boy's tone made Tom look at him more carefully. "Tell you what," he said finally. "You come back here every Saturday and help me with inventory and cleaning. Work hard for a month and I'll give you a discount on materials. But you'll still need more help than I can provide." Marcus agreed immediately. Every Saturday, he swept floors, organized shelves, and learned about different types of screws, nails, and tools. Tom began teaching him basic carpentry and electrical work, skills he said would be essential for the project. Word of Marcus's plan began to spread through Cedar Ridge. Reactions were mixed. Some people admired his ambition, but doubted his ability to follow through. Others thought he was wasting his time on an impossible dream. But a few began to listen with interest. Mrs. Chen, no relation, despite the shared name, who owned the local diner, offered to provide sandwiches for any volunteers who might help with the project. Pastor Williams said the church youth group might be willing to assist with trail clearing. Even Dr. Sarah Kim, who had recently moved to town to work at the medical clinic, expressed interest in the educational possibilities of a restored observatory. But Marcus also faced opposition. The town council worried about liability issues. Some parents thought the project was dangerous for children. Mr. Peterson, who owned the mountain property adjacent to the observatory, complained that increased traffic would disturb the wildlife. Every great project faces resistance, Nai told Marcus one evening as they shared dinner. The question isn't whether people will doubt you. The question is whether you'll doubt yourself. Marcus never did. By November, Marcus had assembled a small team of supporters. Tom Sullivan had agreed to donate materials at cost. The church youth group had committed to weekend work sessions. Dr. Kim had offered to help apply for grants to fund the project. They decided to start with clearing the trail, working in sections to make the path safe and accessible. On the first Saturday of November, 12 volunteers met at the base of Mount Resilience, armed with shovels, pruning shears, and enthusiasm. The work was harder than anyone had expected. The trail was not just overgrown but fundamentally damaged. Water runoff had carved deep gullies across the path. Landslides had deposited tons of rock and debris. What they had hoped to accomplish in a few weekends would clearly take months. By noon, several volunteers had given up and gone home. By evening, only Marcus, Tom, and 2 of the older youth group members remained. They had managed to clear barely 50 yards of trail. "Maybe we bit off more than we can chew, kid," Tom said, wiping sweat from his forehead. But Marcus looked at those 50 yards of cleared path and saw something different. "Look," he said, pointing to the smooth, safe trail they had created. Yesterday, this was impossible to walk through. Today, anyone can make it this far. Tomorrow, we'll make it possible to go a little further. The next weekend, only 8 volunteers showed up. The weekend after that, 5. By December, Marcus was often working alone, chipping away at the trail with hand tools, moving rocks that seemed to weigh more than he did. The weather grew worse. Snow made the work dangerous and sometimes impossible. Marcus's hands became permanently stained with dirt and calloused from gripping tools. His back ached every night. Several times, he slipped on icy rocks and barely avoided serious injury. One particularly discouraging Saturday, after working alone for 6 hours and making what seemed like no progress at all, Marcus sat on a boulder and felt doubt creep into his mind for the first time. The mountains seemed to loom above him, massive and unconquerable. The observatory, hidden somewhere in the mist above, felt as distant as the stars it was meant to observe. It was then that he heard footsteps on the trail below. Climbing toward him was Ana Rodriguez, a girl from his class whom he barely knew. She was carrying a thermos and a backpack that looked heavy enough to contain serious equipment. "My dad said you might be up here," she called out as she approached. "Thought you could use some hot chocolate." Anna was the daughter of Marcus's teacher, Mr. Rodriguez. She was quiet in class, one of those students who always had the right answer but rarely volunteered to speak. Marcus had no idea she even knew about his project. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, accepting the thermos gratefully. Anna shrugged, settling down on a nearby rock. "I've been watching you work on this for weeks. Everyone says you're crazy, but I think they're wrong. My dad showed me some of the research you did about your ancestor. Did you know he was only 16 when he started building the observatory? Marcus hadn't known that. Really? Really. And he worked on it for 12 years before it was finished. 12 years, Marcus. Most people give up on their dreams after 12 days. They worked together that afternoon, and Anna proved to be stronger and more determined than her quiet classroom demeanor had suggested. She had brought proper trail-building tools borrowed from her father, and she seemed to understand instinctively how to move rocks and clear debris efficiently. "I've been thinking about this project," she said as they worked. "You're approaching it like one person trying to do everything. But what if we thought about it differently? What if we broke it down into smaller projects that different people could take ownership of?" Anna had a point. Instead of asking volunteers to commit to the entire massive undertaking, they could create specific jobs that individuals or small groups could complete independently. Someone could take responsibility for research and grants. Another person could focus on documenting the historical significance of the observatory. A third could work on getting permits and addressing safety concerns. That evening, Anna and Marcus sat in Nai's kitchen, drinking tea and planning a new approach to the project. Anna had brought a notebook and was writing down ideas faster than Marcus could speak them. "What we need," she said, "is to make other people feel like this is their project too, not just yours." Over the next few weeks, Anna helped Marcus create what they called the Observatory Restoration Initiative. Instead of asking for volunteers to help with Marcus's dream, they invited community members to participate in restoring a piece of local history that belonged to everyone. The response was dramatically different. Dr. Kim volunteered to lead the grant-writing effort and discovered that several foundations were specifically interested in funding projects that combined historical preservation with educational opportunities. Pastor Williams organized the youth group into specialized teams, some focused on trail maintenance, others on researching the observatory's history, still others on planning educational programs that could eventually be offered there. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, created an exhibit about the Chen Observatory that attracted visitors from neighboring towns. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the project, which caught the attention of the Regional Historical Society. Most surprisingly, Mr. Peterson, who had initially opposed the project, approached Marcus with an unexpected offer. It turned out that his property included a section of the original road to the observatory that was in much better condition than the trail Marcus had been clearing. "I've been thinking about what you said," Mr. Peterson told Marcus. "About making the mountain useful instead of just leaving it wild. My grandfather used to tell stories about visiting that observatory when he was young. Maybe it's time people could visit it again." Mr. Peterson offered to grant an easement, allowing the restoration team to use the better preserved section of road, which would cut the trail clearing work in half. By February, the project had real momentum. The trail work was progressing steadily, with regular volunteer sessions. Dr. Kim had secured a small grant to cover basic materials. The Historical Society had agreed to provide expertise on preserving the telescope and other original equipment. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus received a letter addressed to him personally, forwarded from the Historical Society. It was from Professor Elizabeth Chen at the State University. A distant relative he had never heard of, who had learned about the restoration project through the newspaper articles. Professor Chen was an astrophysicist who specialized in the history of American observatories. She had been researching their shared ancestor for years and had access to original documents, photographs, and technical specifications that Marcus had never seen. "I would be honored to help restore my great-uncle's observatory," she wrote. "I can provide technical expertise, funding assistance, and graduate student volunteers. More importantly, I can help ensure that when the restoration is complete, the observatory becomes a genuine educational resource that honors the scientific legacy your ancestor intended." Professor Chen visited Cedar Ridge in March, bringing with her a truck full of documents, photographs, and equipment. She was a small woman with silver hair and intense eyes who spoke about astronomy with the same passion Marcus felt about the restoration project. When she saw the observatory for the first time, she stood silently for several minutes, running her hands over the brass fittings of the old telescope. "He built this better than I expected," she said finally. "With proper restoration, this could be one of the finest small observatories in the region." But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, Marcus faced the biggest obstacle yet. In April, the town council called a public hearing about the observatory project. What Marcus expected to be a routine approval of permits turned into a heated debate about the wisdom and safety of the entire undertaking. Several council members had concerns about liability. What if someone was injured on the mountain trail? What if the old observatory structure was unsafe? What if the project attracted more visitors than the small town could handle? More troubling were the comments from some community members who had begun to resent the attention the project was receiving. They worried that outside visitors would change the character of their quiet town. They questioned whether a 12-year-old boy should be driving such a major community initiative. "This has gotten out of hand," said Mrs. Foster, who owned the town's only bed and breakfast. "We're talking about letting children lead construction projects on a dangerous mountain. It's irresponsible." Mr. Johnson, who sat on the school board, was even more direct. "Young man," he said, looking straight at Marcus, "I admire your enthusiasm, but enthusiasm isn't enough for a project of this magnitude. You've never completed anything like this before. You have no experience managing volunteers, no training in construction or historical preservation, no understanding of the legal and financial complexities involved. What makes you think you can succeed where adults would hesitate to try?" For a moment, Marcus felt the familiar doubt creeping back. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for his response. The council chamber was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. Marcus thought about all the people who had told him the project was impossible. He thought about the months of working alone on the mountain, moving rocks that seemed unmovable, clearing a path that seemed impermeable. He thought about Anna's research, Professor Chen's expertise, Tom Sullivan's patient teaching, and Nine-Eye's quiet confidence. But mostly, he thought about the afternoon he had first looked through his great-great-grandfather's telescope and seen the valley spread out below him like a promise. "Mr. Johnson," Marcus said, standing up so his voice would carry to the back of the room, "you're right that I've never done anything like this before. But neither had my great-great-grandfather when he started. Neither had the people who built this town, or carved these mountain roads, or created any of the things we now take for granted." He paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from skeptical to encouraging. "You ask what makes me think I can succeed. I can succeed because I won't stop trying. I can succeed because I'm not trying to do it alone. I'm asking our whole community to do it together. I can succeed because when adults look at that mountain, they see all the reasons why something can't be done. When I look at it, I see all the ways it can be done. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Pastor Williams stood up. "I'd like to say something," he announced. "I've been watching this young man work for months. I've never seen anyone his age show such dedication and persistence. But more than that, I've watched him turn a personal dream into a community vision. The observatory project has brought our town together in ways I haven't seen in years. Maybe the question isn't whether Marcus can complete this project. Maybe the question is whether we're going to support him or let our own fears stop something beautiful from happening." One by one, other supporters spoke up. Dr. Kim talked about the educational value of the restored observatory. Tom Sullivan vouched for Marcus's work ethic and growing construction skills. Mrs. Patterson described the historical significance of preserving the site. But the most powerful testimony came from Anna Rodriguez. 6 months ago, she said, Marcus was just another kid in our class. He wasn't particularly popular or athletic or obviously special. But he had something most of us don't have. He believed that one person could make a difference if they just refused to give up. Watching him work on this project has changed how I think about what's possible. It's changed how a lot of us think about what's possible. Even if the observatory is never finished, Marcus has already succeeded at something more important. He's proven that dreams don't have to stay dreams if you're willing to work for them. The town council voted 4-3 to approve the restoration project with conditions. The work would be supervised by licensed contractors. Safety inspections would be required at every stage. Insurance would have to be secured. And Marcus would have to demonstrate continued academic performance. The project couldn't interfere with his education. Marcus agreed to every condition without hesitation. The summer of his 13th year was the hardest of Marcus's life, and also the most rewarding. With Professor Chen's graduate students providing technical expertise and Tom Sullivan ensuring safety standards were met, the restoration work began in earnest. The trail was completed by June, creating a safe, switchbacked path to the observatory that could be used by visitors of all ages. July was devoted to structural repairs, replacing damaged sections of the dome, reinforcing the foundation, and installing new electrical systems. The most delicate work involved restoring the telescope itself. Professor Chen had located original manuals and specifications, and she worked with Marcus for hours every day, teaching him how to clean and calibrate the intricate mechanisms. "Patience," she would say whenever Marcus rushed a delicate adjustment. "Your ancestors spent 2 years just grinding the primary mirror for this telescope. Good work can't be hurried." Marcus learned that restoring something old required different skills than building something new. Every piece had to be cleaned, evaluated, and either repaired or carefully replaced with period-appropriate materials. The brass fittings had to be polished by hand. The wooden mountings had to be treated for decades of weather damage. The optical elements had to be aligned with precision measured in fractions of degrees. But gradually, the great telescope came back to life. By August, Marcus could look through the eyepiece and see Jupiter's moons, Saturn's rings, and nebulae so distant their light had been traveling since before humans existed. The first time he achieved perfect focus on a cluster of stars, he understood why his great-great-grandfather had devoted years of his life to creating this place. The restoration was completed in September, almost exactly 1 year after Marcus had first climbed the mountain alone. The grand reopening of the Chen Observatory was scheduled for the first Saturday in October, exactly 1 year after Marcus's first solo climb up the mountain. The event had grown far beyond what anyone had originally envisioned. Astronomy clubs from 3 states had requested permission to attend. The regional media was planning to cover the story. The state university was sending representatives. Even the governor's office had sent a congratulatory letter. But for Marcus, the most important attendees were the people of Cedar Ridge who had supported him, doubted him, and ultimately helped him succeed. On Friday evening, as Marcus and Anna did a final check of all the observatory systems, he found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The countless hours of physical labor, the months of planning and research, the meetings and presentations and grant applications, the moments of doubt and the breakthroughs that followed. Nervous? Anna asked, adjusting the focusing mechanism on the telescope. A little, Marcus admitted. What if people aren't impressed? What if the telescope doesn't work properly during the demonstration? What if we've made mistakes we haven't noticed? Anna smiled. Marcus, do you remember what you told the town council? About how your great-great-grandfather saw all the ways something could be done instead of all the reasons it couldn't. Marcus nodded. Well, tomorrow night, when people look through this telescope and see Saturn's rings for the first time, or when kids from town start coming up here for astronomy classes, or when visitors drive from hundreds of miles away to visit the observatory you restored, they're not going to be thinking about small mistakes or minor imperfections. They're going to be thinking about how one kid refused to accept that something was impossible. Saturday evening arrived clear and cold, perfect weather for stargazing. By sunset, more than 200 people had climbed the trail to the observatory. Some were locals who had supported the project from the beginning. Others were visitors who had traveled considerable distances to attend the reopening. Professor Chen had organized a program that included a brief history of the original observatory, an explanation of the restoration process, and demonstrations of the telescope's capabilities. But she insisted that Marcus be the one to give the first presentation. Standing in front of the crowd, looking out at faces lit by the warm glow of the observatory's restored interior lighting, Marcus felt a moment of pure gratitude, not just for the people who had helped him, but for the entire journey that had brought him to this place. A year ago, he began. Most of you thought I was crazy for believing this project was possible. To be honest, there were times when I thought you might be right. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But I learned something important during this past year. The difference between possible and impossible isn't usually about resources or expertise or luck. It's about whether you're willing to keep working when things get difficult, whether you're willing to ask for help when you need it, and whether you're willing to believe that problems exist to be solved, not to stop us from trying. He gestured toward the telescope, gleaming in the soft light like a bridge between earth and sky. My great-great-grandfather built this observatory because he believed that understanding our place in the universe would help us understand our place in the world. Tonight, we're going to look at stars and planets that haven't been seen from this mountain in decades. But what I hope you'll really see is proof that when we work together, when we refuse to give up on something important, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. The reopening was covered by newspapers across the region. The story of the boy who restored his ancestors' observatory captured people's imagination in ways that surprised everyone, including Marcus. Within 6 months, the Chen Observatory was hosting regular public viewing sessions, astronomy classes for local schools, and workshops for amateur astronomers. Professor Chen established a summer internship program that brought college students to Cedar Ridge to conduct research and assist with educational programs. The project's success had ripple effects throughout the town. The increased visitors supported local businesses. The positive media attention attracted new residents, including several retirees who wanted to live in a community that valued both history and education. Property values increased, but more importantly, civic engagement increased. People who had never before participated in town activities began volunteering for various projects. Marcus found himself invited to speak at schools and community organizations throughout the state. The story of the observatory restoration became a case study in persistence and community organizing. But the attention never went to his head, partly because Nai made sure he kept doing his regular chores and homework. "Fame is like mountain weather," she told him. "It changes quickly and doesn't always last. But character is like the mountain itself, solid, permanent, and built one stone at a time." On his 14th birthday, Marcus received a letter from the National Youth Achievement Foundation, informing him that he had been selected to receive their annual Perseverance Award. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., and he would have the opportunity to meet other young people who had overcome significant challenges to achieve their goals. But the recognition that meant the most to him came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Foster, the bed and breakfast owner who had been one of his harshest critics during the town council hearing, approached him after a public viewing session at the observatory. "I owe you an apology," she said simply. "And more than that, I owe you thanks. What you've done for this town, what you've shown all of us about what's possible when someone truly commits to something, it's changed how I think about a lot of things." She paused, looking up at the clear mountain sky visible through the observatory's open dome. "I've lived here for 30 years, and I thought I knew what this place was capable of. You've proven that we're capable of much more than I realized." 5 years later, Marcus graduated as valedictorian of Cedar Ridge High School. His acceptance speech was brief, but it included a sentence that many people in the audience would remember for years afterward. "The most important thing I learned in high school didn't happen in a classroom. I learned that the difference between dreamers and achievers isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to keep working when everyone else has given up." Marcus accepted a full scholarship to study astronomy at the State University, where Professor Chen had arranged for him to work in her research lab. But he made sure to spend every summer in Cedar Ridge, helping to maintain the observatory and working with the next generation of young people who visited for astronomy camps. The Chen Observatory became a permanent fixture in the life of Cedar Ridge, attracting thousands of visitors each year and serving as an educational resource for schools throughout the region. But its greater legacy was the lesson it taught about the power of persistence, community, and refusing to accept that anything worthwhile is impossible. Marcus kept a photograph on his desk throughout his college years and beyond, a picture taken during the observatory's reopening ceremony, showing him standing next to the restored telescope with Anna, Nai, Professor Chen, Tom Sullivan, and dozens of other people who had helped make the dream reality. Whenever he faced new challenges, Whenever a goal seemed too difficult or a problem too complex, Marcus would look at that photograph and remember what he had learned on a mountain in Colorado. That the boy who never gives up eventually becomes the man who can accomplish anything. And on clear nights, when he looked up at the stars through whatever telescope he happened to be using, Marcus would think about his great-great-grandfather and the legacy of persistence that had been passed down through generations. The understanding that some things are worth working for no matter how long it takes, no matter how difficult the journey, and no matter how many people say it can't be done. Because sometimes, the most important victory isn't reaching your destination. Sometimes, it's proving to yourself and everyone around you that giving up is always a choice, and it's a choice you don't have to make. The boy who never gave up had learned the most important lesson of all, that the only truly impossible dreams are the ones we stop working toward. And high on Mount Resilience, the Chen Observatory continues to welcome visitors who come to look at the stars and learn about the power of persistence, one clear night at a time. The end. And that's the story of Marcus Chen, the boy who proved that persistence can move mountains, literally and figuratively. What did you think of Marcus's journey? Which part of his story resonated most with you? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. If this story inspired you, here's what I want you to do right now. First, think about a dream or goal you've been putting off because it seems too difficult or impossible. Write it down. Marcus started with just a dream and a willingness to take the first step. Second, hit that like button if this story motivated you to keep pushing toward your own goals. Your likes help me know you want more inspiring content like this. Third, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our weekly inspirational stories. We share tales of real people and fictional heroes who prove that ordinary individuals can achieve extraordinary things. Fourth, share this video with someone who needs to hear Marcus's message today. Maybe it's a friend facing a tough challenge, a family member who's given up on a dream, or someone who just needs a reminder that persistence pays off. And here's my challenge for you. Pick one small action you can take this week toward your own impossible goal. Just like Marcus clearing 50 yards of trail on his first day, start somewhere, start small, but start today. Remember what Marcus learned. The difference between dreamers and achievers isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to keep working when everyone else has given up. Your mountain is waiting. Your observatory is up there. The only question is, will you be the person who never gives up? I'll see you next week with another story that proves the impossible is just unopened possibility. Until then, keep climbing, keep believing, and never, ever give up.